My name is Brian Barbour, Regional Refugee Protection Advisor at Act for Peace, affiliate of the Caldor Center for International Refugee Law, and advisor to the Asia-Pacific Refugee Rights Network. This presentation is based on the Vulnerability Screening Tool, developed by the International Detention Coalition jointly with UNHCR. You can visit the link on this slide to view the entire materials. Protection monitoring is a continuous process that identifies protection needs, vulnerabilities, and risks on an ongoing basis as they arise and as changes occur. It is about contributing to the exercise and protection of rights, such as those set out by Jane McAdam last week. It is also about documenting gaps and violations, advocating for those gaps to be filled and violations to be remedied, and collaborating with other stakeholders to address gaps and violations ourselves. In an ideal scenario, we want everyone connected to everyone else. We want everyone to have the capacity to recognize protection needs, vulnerabilities, and risks. We want multiple entry points for persons in need of protection. We want improved access to protection and services. Such systems of identification and referrals mechanisms require that we know the population and know our partners, so that we can provide targeted support based on actual needs. Such an ideal system may not exist in practice, but the goal remains, and we must never stop trying to come closer. We must prioritize collaboration and joint capacity building as part of the approach. This approach is in line with the recently adopted global compacts that both call for a whole of society approach. The fact is, no single organization, not even a UN body or a government, could possibly address refugee protection on their own. The best way to meet diverse needs with limited resources is for everyone to collaborate, each stakeholder contributing to a collective whole. A useful starting point is to consider issues of access. Access is about government permission and reducing bureaucratic barriers, but it is not only about the government. There are a number of questions we can ask about our own services and context to assess the accessibility of services. Do refugees want to access our services? Do they see the value of it? If they want to access those services, where do they go? Can they actually get there? What barriers, physical, but also social, cultural, age, and gender related, stand in the way? Are NGOs willing, and are they able to do the work? Do staff understand what to look out for? Do they understand the complicated ethics? Is there adequate time and space for individual, private, confidential interviews? And are CSOs networked? Does everyone know what everyone else does and know how to make a quality referral? For protection monitoring, it is not important that we assign strict definitions to these terms, screening and assessment, but what is important is that we understand the distinction. On the one hand, we want everyone in the network to be able to recognize protection needs, vulnerabilities, and risks when they see and hear them, and then be able to document them and make high-quality referrals. But on the other hand, we want those with the relevant mandates and expertise to be able to assess and confirm needs. For example, we may be able to recognize the symptoms of trauma or signs of mental health needs, but we would then ideally be able to make a referral to a mental health professional or expert to make a proper assessment and provide an appropriate intervention. We all know from experience that it is never as simple as finding out what a person says they need and giving it to them. But it is important to find out what a person says they need and not make assumptions. Perceptions are also important if we hope to actually address needs, vulnerabilities, and risks. Still, we must also use our eyes and ears to consider what may actually be going on, even if the interviewee is not saying it. Consider family members present or not present and ask about them. Consider fears, risks, and vulnerabilities that may color the words that they use. Consider also the barriers to trust and barriers to access that stand in their way. Consider also the urgency of the situation, whether risks appear low and manageable, whether risks are foreseeable unless we provide some kind of preventative support, or whether there are immediate risks that require prompt intervention. Everyone can assess for risk in the context of their role and in simple ways. For example, one staff noticed that a person stopped participating in activities and learned that they were also withdrawing from the community, so they brought it to the attention of a case manager. Providing those we mean to assist with even small choices can help reduce feelings of helplessness and powerlessness. Providing clear communication about protocol and changes to routine can help. Being respectful, non-judgmental, and empathetic is a must every step of the way, even when the same is not reciprocated. And fostering links with the community and other organizations can contribute to safety, dignity, and reduction of fear and anxiety. Working with traumatized individuals can also have an impact on you. There is a stereotype that government officials become cynical and NGO staff become crusaders. But the truth is that there are cynical staff in NGOs, and there are crusaders in the government too. And if you are at either end of this spectrum, the quality of your work will suffer, and you will burn out eventually. If you intend to make it in this field, we have to find ways to de-stress and maintain objectivity and empathy. The vulnerability screening tool outlines a number of situations of vulnerability that we should look out for. Broadly, these include children and youth, sex, gender identity and sexual orientation, health and welfare concerns, and protection needs. But the vulnerability screening tool also emphasizes that these categories are just to draw your attention, but there may be other factors not captured. You always need to consider the particular person who actually comes before you, and you cannot rely on a checkbox exercise. Basically, to be vulnerable is to be exposed to risks of harm. It is situational, and we should avoid the notion that groups or individuals are inherently vulnerable because of certain characteristics. Also, situations of vulnerability change. Resilience is basically the ability to recover or adjust. Despite sometimes enormously difficult circumstances, people develop coping strategies. Individuals possess both inner strength and cultural and social connections through family and community ties. We should seek to strengthen and support these so that the person can exercise more control over their own life and environment. I will draw your attention to one broad legal category listed above in order to make some particular points. On this slide, you see the definition of a refugee. It is important to remember that the question of whether or not a person is a refugee is not a matter of discretion. It is a question of fact, and it requires an objective legal analysis. A person does not become a refugee when UNHCR or a government recognizes them as such or grants them asylum. The person is a refugee automatically if they fit the definition. For example, to call refugees something else, like forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals, does not change the fact that they are refugees, nor does it change their rights or the legal obligations of states and other actors. For example, non-refoulement, the principle that a refugee cannot be sent back to persecution, still applies even if we do not use the word refugee. While semantics tend to play a political role in dialogue about displaced persons and their predicament, the risks that we as service providers have to be vigilant about are the risks of refoulement and other denials of rights, or the denial of access to UNHCR or other actors mandated to provide protection. Consider also, for example, a family context. Children or spouses are often automatically considered dependents to the person who presents themselves, and an agency may never actually even meet some family members. Even well-meaning adults can take their children's or spouses' needs for granted, and conflicts of interest are common among families. For example, consider the situation where an entire family has certain health and food needs, but one family member is suffering from ongoing domestic violence at the hands of another family member. In the protection context, we are confronted with complicated ethics every day. We don't always recognize it as an ethical dilemma. The more you think about these issues and how best to respond to them, or even how to prevent them before they occur, the more effective you become in your work, and the more effective your organization is. To finish this video, I encourage you to read this scenario and answer 3 questions. Why are ethics particularly important in the refugee context? What are the ethical and protection related issues here? What would you do?